In this episode, you will get to know Peter Evans. He's our Chief Strategy Officer. He's the co-chair of the MIT Platform Strategy Summit, together with Geoffrey Parker and Marshall von Alstein, who have written this defining best-selling book, Platform Revolution. He's chair of the summit in Barcelona, the Network Summit. He's a board member of Marketplace Risk, and he's educating senior leaders as part of Caltech Executive Education Program. And he will also discuss with me a couple of items that in those English editions that we're going to do, which we will be focusing on. So hear more about the 16X challenge that Europe has to catch up. Hear more about the frontier concept, which we only quickly introduced, but also circular platforms and a growth outlook, as well as, last but not least, the ecosystem mindset. Again, this is an edition without a guest, but it helps you also from an English-speaking audience here in Europe to understand what we will be covering, and you'll get to know the two DJs. Now back to the disco. Hi there, this is the Platform Disco. I'm one of the co-hosts and my name is Alex.
Hi, I'm Peter Evans, also participant, and look forward to robust discussion.
Absolutely. This is a quick introduction session, and you realize we're speaking English. You might have heard already the German recording of this in the previous week, but we're actually going to do two languages. Peter, why do you think it's important that we also use your language, your mother tongue?
Well, because I don't speak German, so.
There you
go. But it's this is an international topic, so it's I think valuable to bring in the international voices, and so English is the way to go there.
Absolutely. So please be so kind and maybe introduce yourself a little bit. Why are you the right person to talk about platform discovery? And that's the reason why it's called Disco. Discovering the strategy, technology, and humans behind transformative and transactional ecosystems. That's what we're doing here, but we're going to explain that in a minute. But why are you the right person to talk about it?
Sure. So I lead strategy for McFadyen Digital, which specializes in advising companies on their platform strategy as well as helping them with their technology selection. But I've been in the space for a long time, over a decade, and have found it both incredibly compelling from a business model perspective, incredibly interesting from an intellectual perspective, and I guess finally an imperative, because we're finding that more and more platforms are successful, and companies that embrace this business model have a chance to create real competitive advantage.
Yes. And maybe you can also tell the audience a little bit about your background, what actually led you to this point. Why are you the right person to listen to? Because you're not only somebody that is working on theory, but has tons of practical experience as well.
Yeah, sure. So I got interested in platforms while I was leading the strategy team at GE, it when I came across it, it made a lot of sense. We're living in this digital era, and we need business models that work for being successful, leveraging digital technologies. And so as I dug into it, I was just amazed at the diversity. It applies in the commercial, what they call B2C arena. It applies in the B2B arena. There's just amazing proliferation of platforms because they're leveraging digital technologies.
And you're also very active in the field. Beside being the Chief Strategy Officer here, maybe you can give the audience some highlights of where you're engaged in the field, because you're really, on one hand, a thought leader, but you're also really passionate of driving this whole thing forward. Without going into the content details, more that the people understand why having this English edition for the European market is also really important to us, because you bring a real broad lens and perspective to us.
Yeah, so, when you learn a topic and you want to keep on top of the topic, you have to be engaged in the communities that are working in those areas. So there are a number of them that I found very fruitful. I co-chair the MIT Platform Strategy Summit, and that's put me in connection, in dialogue with some of the leading platform scholars in the world. I've also joined the advisory board of Marketplace Risk, which is an organization that's been around for a decade, and it focuses on the trust, risk, and safety elements of platforms. And I also am a partner and co-chair of the Network Summit, which is based in Barcelona, which is really focused on community building around platforms and platform professionals in Europe. So try to keep my fingers in a variety of pots. And then this past year, I was invited to China by Alibaba and participated in the Lohan Academy. This is a think tank set up by Alibaba. And so I had an opportunity to meet them and learn more about what's going on in the China context, because they have deployed very, very large platforms as well.
Cool. Yeah, let me quickly introduce myself. I lead for McFadyen Digital, the EMEA operation here. I'm part of the strategy team, and what I bring to the party is a broad lens, which is brand-led. So ultimately, platforms are also brands. Ecosystems have a brand angle, and you need to sort that out early and not when you're hitting certain walls. The other thing is I have an innovation background. Platform business models does always mean innovation, and you need to manage innovation, stay on top of things, and with the acceleration of exponential tech, managing this innovation is actually one of the core tasks. And that ultimately leads to the third thing, which is how do you organize your operations so that you can do your running business next to this innovation in a structured fashion. And the last part is obviously the platform and ecosystem context. And here, I think it's important to acknowledge that platforms are complex. They're not complicated, but they're complex to understand. And I'm really passionate about helping our clients, but also Europe in general and other places in the world, to leverage the power of platforms to do good and create impact. And now talking about that, I still remember, I think it was 22, when in your keynote for the Network Summit in Barcelona, you were introducing the 16X challenge. And I think that's a good reference point why we do this podcast here. Maybe a quick overview of the 16X challenge. What is it?
So that refers to the fact that Europe lags in large-scale platform creation. This isn't to say that Europe doesn't have platforms. There are. But it's been a challenge, it seems, for Europe to create platforms that operate at the same scale as we see in North America and Asia. And so when we calculate the top 100 platforms, Europe falls far below. And in fact, when we look at kind of what would be required of Europe to become on par with the US, you would need to see a 16x growth in the size and scale of platforms in Europe. So huge hurdle to mount. This isn't to say that European companies don't use or European consumers don't use platforms. They do. It just so happens they happen to be American platforms generally. And in fact, my understanding of the most recent data is that something like on the retail side, Amazon has 60% market share of retail. And in France, I think it's even higher, 70%. So the American platforms have serve an important function and quite use it. But the question is how does Europe also develop platforms that fit its unique business opportunities and capabilities?
Yeah, and we will definitely dig into that. Why is it that way? What can be done to make progress, and what are the current biggest barriers in the space? Another angle, which I think we're taking always when we work with our clients, is this concept of the frontiers, the new frontiers. I think it's a very important concept without going into the weeds here. Why are platforms and ecosystems this new frontier, and they keep progressing, and we see that customers still sit in the very fundamental first stage type of marketplace and platform generation, well, actually everything's progressing. Could you
Sure.
maybe spend a minute on that?
Yeah, so I think when we look historically, we've seen inflection points for firms, and the firms that are able to both strategically and organize themselves from a structural standpoint as well as a talent standpoint and the technologies bring into the firm. Some are really able to do that incredibly successfully. Those become what we call frontier firms, and those that don't become followers or laggards. And the challenge, of course, is that frontier is constantly shifting. And when digitization and the internet came in, it was really actually American firms that quickly seized on that technology and moved to the frontier. And we saw the rise of Airbnb, Uber, Google, Microsoft. All these companies were very successful in leveraging those technologies and moving to the frontier. The challenge, of course, is that frontier is shifting again. And one factor that is playing a big role is AI. And so that frontier is going to move. And the question is, what does that mean? And who is going to be able to assemble that technology, bring it into their organization to gain competitive advantage? I think the big question is does having a platform business model give you an advantage in the application of AI? And I think we would argue that yes, it does.
And we will not go into that detail now, but that's why you need to keep coming back, please, because we will do so. A third angle which I'd like to introduce to you guys is looking at leaders, particularly in the Germanic space. We see that 60% of those don't dare to ask for help or admit that they don't understand. This is a study back from 2 to 3 years ago from the University of St. Gallen. And I think it's very important that we're not shy to ask questions. So what we want to also show is how have businesses that already entered this space enabled organization, enabled teams, and also leaders to be able to guide into this direction? And what are those core questions and concerns that people and organizations do have if they're thinking about it? Because what we hear very often is, look, platform and marketplace sounds really, really interesting, but we don't know a lot. And so we want to help also, how do you engage? How do you find out? How do you play around? How do you find the right communities to learn, to make those connections? What to read? We are providing a lot of content. We are thought leaders in the space. So our role is also to enable that. And this is the third why we're doing all that. Now, in terms of scope, Peter, we're always talking about strategy, technology, people, and organization. What are we going to cover here?
Well, hopefully there will be some topics that we bring to the table and some topics that others bring to the table. But, one area that I think is looking at the next generation of platforms. We've had platforms really emerge onto the scene for a decade now, but the landscape is not static. It's constantly changing. And so digging into what are some of the ways that the second generation platforms are emerging and what does that mean is one area. And one area that I spend a lot of time on now is looking at closing the loop, as they say, which is how do you apply platform strategy and platform methodology to creating circular platforms. So that would be one topic we can explore.
Great. And then the technology part, we are a strategic system integrator. So we are partnering with prime software companies. So we don't want to go into technical detail because we're strategists. I think it's important that we can provide also a perspective on that one with our guests and see the challenges and maybe also the beliefs that people have in terms of sequencing, because we hear very often, would love to do it, but first we got to do this, and time is ticking and nobody's waiting for you to jump onto the bandwagon because there is a second mover disadvantage, which I'm sure also going to cover. Last but not least, and I think, just been at the B2B online last week, you could tell that one of the core challenges is really how are we going to organizing this because we have a running business and we want to enter into this field and it's highly complex. What models are there to do it? What are the traps? What do you need to cover to enable all that? And so we will for sure, with our guests, look at strategy, tech, people, and organization. And yeah, with regards to the to these next generation marketplaces or platforms, you already talked about the circular marketplaces, closing the loop. Maybe just as a teaser, an appetizer, what other one or two examples would you like to headline?
Well, there's a lot of happening in the B2B space with how companies create business ecosystems and how that applies, but manufacturers have some constraints because they typically don't fulfill. They use distributors. So how do you structure a platform business model that takes into account companies that have large distribution networks that they don't necessarily own? So we can explore some interesting ways in which companies have already done that, and we're seeing evolve and emerge in the market. I think another area that's very interesting is the great energy transition and how marketplaces can help with a variety of challenges that affect this transition. One is just the conversion to electric power. So how do we get fleet operators talking more effectively with utilities would be one area. And then there's questions about creating efficient markets, like getting right supply of materials. So we're seeing the emergence of platforms for steel, platforms for lumber, and construction materials. So lots of areas where platforms can play. Another area that's pretty interesting is 3D printing. Can you build marketplaces for 3D printers? And who would the parties be on the buy side and the sell side in that area? So lots of interesting things. And then finally, the software technology is evolving as well. We're shifting increasingly to low-code solutions that are making it possible to have users create more and more of the elements of the platform, or once they have the platform in place, be able to adjust it. And then, of course, AI is going to come in and change how platforms operate in many, many different ways. So lots of interesting and exciting topics to explore.
Nice. I'd like to add two or three. We're just working on our monetization book, which will be launching also in January, together with the NRF show in the US. And I think what is interesting, when people with little understanding of this whole ecosystem approach start there, they are actually thinking really on take rates, listing fees, subscription models, and what have you. But once you're really able to have those network effects, you can beautifully layer in new streams of income. The most common one is obviously retail advertising, but if you think embedded finance, embedded insurance, data business models. And that's why I think what we're trying to say is there is a sense of urgency, because there is a winner takes most or winner takes all, maybe not in B2B to that degree, but also there things are going to accelerate dramatically. And once you have that base, the foundation, this hook, then actually you can benefit through tremendous growth rates. And one of the leading software providers in this field was actually posting this morning that marketplaces globally were 6x the growth of e-commerce. So I see very often, and we're now end of year, beginning of next year, business planning is done and people are, +3%, +4%, and then there's huge inflation. And it's so great if they have big levers of reoccurring revenue, of network effects. And so I think it's a pity that so little in strategies and leadership teams and boards and owners, marketplaces are talked about. And that's what we definitely want to change. Last but not least, who is this for? I think that's a perfect bridge. You just mentioned the circular challenges that we do have with the batteries, with CO2, etc. We are targeting here, on one hand, the mid-sized companies. In the German context, we would call them Mittelstand, and also hidden champions. But we're also talking here with guests from the enterprise and consortium level. And maybe you can just spend 2 sentences on the latter.
Well, what's I think pretty clear is that platform business models can apply in many, many different contexts. It can apply to very large organizations. It can apply to small organizations. It can apply to well-established organizations as well as startups. So I think the trick is to figure out how that business model can achieve your business goals and growth opportunities. So we can explore, I think, all those dimensions in the coming months.
Yeah, and I particularly like the consortia approach because Europe is fragmented, and it's not a VC culture to that degree as in the US, or a hyperscaler culture. And hence we see a couple of interesting examples, and we're going to try to get the guests from this field as well to show that actually a whole sector can organize that, and that traditional boundaries of you or my competitor are a little bit old school, and that together something great can be created. Well, thank you, Peter, for this quick overview and introduction. Let me just give you an outline of what's coming next. The next editions will be in German, and we have 2 exciting guests. On one hand, we have Hans Michael Krause from Bosch Rexroth. He's actually leading the ecosystem there, and he's doing a great job with his team to be really partner-led and create a community. And he will be able to tell you how a consistent approach, step by step, that fosters personal relationships is actually really scaling beautifully. And we will have Joachim Bach from Schäfer Shop, who are about to consider in their office equipment space to go that route. And we will be able to share what is going through their heads and what challenges they are facing very openly. And thank you very much. Please come back, share this video podcast with people that fit this briefing that we've just given you, what we're going to cover. Put a like there, put a bell there to be reminded when we have new content. And thank you very much. And Peter, greetings to Colorado. And have a great day. And thanks for tuning in.
I will be seeing you again. Take care.
There you go.
Cheers.
This was the Platform Disco. Goodbye. Come back. And now disco music.